There's a moment late in the war when a man stands on a train platform in the freezing dark, clutching a list of names like it's a life raft. Around him are guards, guns, barking orders, the machinery of death running on schedule. And yet this man is smiling, not because he's happy, because he knows something no one else there fully understands. That list in his hand is not paperwork, it is not ink and paper, it is 1,000 lives pulled back from the edge. And only when the war is over does this man finally break down and say the words that tell us who he really was. He says he could have saved more. That's the real story of Oskar Schindler, and it's nothing like the myth. Before we go any further, if stories like this matter to you, if you believe history should feel human and alive, take a second and subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share this video with a friend who loves true World War II stories. These stories only survive if we keep telling them. Now let me tell you something important right at the start. Oskar Schindler did not begin the war as a hero. He didn't even begin it as a good man. He was a businessman, a drinker, a womanizer. A man who loved nice suits, fast cars, and the sound of clinking glasses late at night. He liked money. He liked status. And when Germany invaded Poland in 1939, Oskar Schindler saw opportunity. He was a Sudeten German born in what's now the Czech Republic. He spoke German, he knew how to charm people, and most importantly, he knew how to work the system. When the Nazis rolled into Krakow, Schindler followed close behind, not with a rifle, with paperwork. He joined the Nazi Party not out of ideology, but because it opened doors, it got contracts signed, it got hands shaken, and it got him what he wanted most, a factory. The factory was an enamelware plant, pots, pans, nothing glamorous. It had belonged to Jewish owners who were forced out under Nazi laws. Schindler took it over cheaply, the way so many did, and renamed it Deutsche Emelwarenfabrik, DEF for short. At first, his concern was simple: keep costs low, keep profits high. And in Nazi-occupied Poland, the cheapest labor available was Jewish labor. That's where Itzhak Stern enters the story. Stern was a Jewish accountant, quiet, thoughtful, and sharp. He understood the system better than most because his life depended on it. Stern helped Schindler get the factory running. He helped him navigate regulations, and slowly, subtly, Stern began to do something else. He began slipping names into the workforce: skilled workers, older men, people who might not survive elsewhere. Every job at Schindler's factory came with a work permit. And a work permit meant protection, at least for now. At first, Schindler barely noticed. He was busy drinking with German officers, hosting lavish dinners, handing out black market goods like cigars and alcohol. He made himself useful. And like many men who survived dangerous systems, he learned that charm could be as powerful as authority. Then came the Krakow ghetto. When the Nazis sealed Jews into the ghetto, Schindler could see it from the hills near his home. Overcrowded streets, starvation, fear. His factory still operated outside the walls. Workers marched in and out each day under guard. And slowly, the distance between profit and people began to close. The turning point, according to many who knew him, came in March 1943. The liquidation of the Krakow ghetto. German troops stormed in. People were dragged from homes, shot in the streets. Children killed where they stood. Schindler watched part of it from horseback on a nearby hill, and among the chaos, he saw something that would stay with him forever. A small girl in a red coat wandering alone through the violence. That image, later immortalized in film, was real in spirit even if the details blur with memory. It represented something snapping inside him. After that day, Schindler changed, not all at once, not cleanly. He didn't become a saint overnight, but he began using his factory for something other than profit. He expanded the workforce. He insisted his workers were essential. He bribed officials constantly. Money, diamonds, alcohol, favors, whatever it took. And Itzhak Stern kept feeding him names. When the Plasso labor camp was established under the command of Ammon Girth, things grew even darker. Girth was a brutal man, unpredictable. He shot prisoners from his balcony for sport. He beat people to death over small mistakes. Schindler dealt with him the same way he dealt with everyone dangerous. He flattered him, drank with him, pretended friendship, all the while pulling workers away from Plasso and into the relative safety of his factory. Make no mistake, Schindler's factory was not a paradise. It was still forced labor, still surrounded by guards, still part of a murderous system, but compared to Plasso, it was a lifeboat in a storm. Schindler made sure food was smuggled in. He allowed religious practices to continue quietly. He punished guards who were too violent. Sometimes he screamed at SS men like a furious parent protecting children, and strangely enough, it often worked. By 1944, the war was turning fast. The Red Army was advancing, camps were being evacuated, death marches were planned, and this is where the list begins to take shape. Schindler learned that Plazo would be shut down and its prisoners sent to Auschwitz. He knew what that meant. Almost no one sent there survived. So he did something reckless, something almost insane. He claimed he needed to move his factory east to Brunlitz in the Sudetenland. He told the Nazis his workers were essential for the war effort, and then he and Stern began compiling a list of names. Men, women, older people, people who should never have been considered useful by Nazi standards. That list would become one of the most famous documents of the Holocaust, not because it was perfect, but because it existed at all. There were mistakes. At one point, the women on the list were accidentally sent to Auschwitz instead of the new factory. Schindler panicked. He traveled there personally. He bribed officials. He argued. He begged. And somehow, unbelievably, he got them released. Very few people ever walked out of Auschwitz alive. Those women did because one man refused to accept no. By the time the war ended, Schindler had spent his entire fortune. Every bribe, every meal, every favor gone. When Germany surrendered, he fled west, knowing the Soviets would see him as a Nazi industrialist. Before he left, the workers gathered around him. They gave him a ring made from gold pulled from a tooth. Inside it was engraved a line from the Talmud: "Whoever saves one life saves the world entire." And it was only then, finally safe, finally done, that Oskar Schindler broke down and cried. Not because of what he'd done, but because of what he hadn't. We pick the story up right there, with Schindler standing at the edge of everything he'd built, broke in every sense of the word, carrying a reputation that didn't fit neatly into any box. But to understand how extraordinary that ending was, we need to slow down and walk back through the middle of the storm, because the truth is, Schindler's greatest risks didn't come at the end of the war. They came when the war was still roaring, when one wrong word, one wrong look, could have ended his life just as quickly as those he was trying to protect. By the time Plazo was fully operational, Schindler was playing a dangerous double game. On paper, he was exactly what the SS wanted: a loyal German industrialist, a party member, a man supplying goods for the Reich. In practice, he was bleeding that same Reich dry, pouring every mark he made back into bribes and protection. SS officers liked him because he drank hard, laughed loud, and never seemed to ask moral questions. That was part of the act. A very carefully maintained act. Those who survived his factory later said Schindler understood something vital about power. He knew cruelty didn't always come from ideology. Often it came from boredom, ego, and alcohol. So he fed those weaknesses. He threw parties for officers while workers starved elsewhere. He handed out gifts that made men look the other way. It wasn't noble. It was practical, and it worked. Amon Goeth was the most dangerous man in Schindler's orbit. Goeth could be charming one minute and murderous the next. He kept dogs trained to attack prisoners. He shot people for missing a button or walking too slowly. And yet Schindler managed to create a strange relationship with him, not friendship, something closer to mutual usefulness. Schindler flattered Goeth's ego. Goeth liked having a powerful civilian ally. That thin thread of tolerance saved lives. But even Goeth noticed something was off. Why was Schindler always expanding his workforce? Why did he insist on keeping older, weaker workers? Why did he argue so fiercely over individuals who seemed worthless by Nazi standards? These questions hung in the air, unspoken but dangerous. Itzhak Stern understood the danger better than anyone. He warned Schindler repeatedly that he was pushing too far. That luck runs out, that even charm has limits. And Schindler, to his credit, listened just enough to survive. He'd pull back, then push again. A step forward, half a step back, always dancing on the edge. One thing that rarely gets said is how chaotic Schindler's factory really was. Production numbers were often poor, machines broke down, materials went missing. On paper, it should have been shut down, but Schindler's ability to manipulate inspectors kept it running. He turned incompetence into camouflage. A factory that barely produced was a factory that didn't draw too much attention. As the war situation worsened for Germany, the cruelty intensified, deportations increased, rumors spread faster than facts. Auschwitz became a word spoken in whispers. Then not spoken at all. Workers knew what happened to those who were sent away. They saw people vanish overnight, and they knew that Schindler, for all his protection, could not stop everything. When the decision came to evacuate camps in 1944, it hit like a thunderclap. Plazo was to be closed, prisoners were to be transferred east, most would not survive the journey even before reaching the camps. Schindler understood instantly what this meant. His workers were about to disappear into the machinery of death. This is where the list truly became a weapon. Contrary to legend, there was not just one list. There were many versions, rewritten and revised as circumstances changed. Names added, names removed, names fought over. SS officers demanded bribes to include certain workers. Schindler paid. Sometimes he lied about skills. Sometimes he exaggerated importance. Sometimes he simply refused to back down. One former SS clerk later admitted that Schindler was exhausting to deal with. Always arguing, always insisting, always paying. It was easier to give him what he wanted than to fight him. That irritation saved lives. When the men arrived at Brunlitz, conditions were harsh but survivable. The women's transport, however, was diverted to Auschwitz. For days, Schindler heard nothing. He drank heavily, he raged, he traveled to Auschwitz himself, which in itself was almost unthinkable. There, surrounded by smoke and fear, he bargained again, diamonds, promises, his last reserves, and against all odds the women were released. That moment alone defies easy explanation. It wasn't supposed to happen. Systems like Auschwitz were designed to swallow people whole, and yet for once the gears slipped. At Brunlitz, Schindler went even further. He deliberately sabotaged production. Shells manufactured there were intentionally defective, not enough to raise alarms, but enough to ensure they couldn't be used. He later admitted this openly. It was one of the few moments where he crossed from saving lives into active resistance. By now, Schindler knew he would not survive the war as a wealthy man. He didn't care. Money had become something else entirely, a tool, a temporary shield, something to be burned up as needed. When he ran out of money, he traded favors. When favors ran out, he risked his life. If you're still with me at this point in the story, take a moment to like the video and share it with someone who thinks heroism always comes neatly packaged. Schindler's story reminds us it rarely does. As winter settled in, food became scarcer. Schindler stole supplies meant for the German army and rerouted them to his workers. He bribed guards to look the other way. He falsified records constantly. Every day was a gamble. One inspection could have ended everything. And then in May 1945, the war finally collapsed. German authority evaporated almost overnight. Guards fled, orders stopped coming. And for the people inside Schindler's factory, survival suddenly felt real in a way it never had before. Schindler gathered his workers and told them the truth. The war was over. He was a hunted man, a Nazi on paper. He would have to flee, and that's when the workers did something extraordinary. They wrote him a letter, signed by everyone, testifying to what he had done. They gave him that ring. And for the first time, Schindler allowed himself to stop performing. He wept, not quietly, not with dignity. He wept like a man who had held himself together with sheer force of will for too long. He looked at his car and said it could have bought 10 more lives. His pin could have saved one more. It's the most human moment in the entire story. Not pride, regret. After the war, Schindler's life did not turn into a fairy tale. He failed at business repeatedly. He struggled with money. His marriage suffered. He drank too much. The habits that once helped him survive did not help him thrive. For years, he lived off the support of the very people he had saved. And yet, wherever he went, he was welcomed by them. In Israel, he was treated not as a saint, but as family. When he died in 1974, he was buried in Jerusalem, one of the few former Nazis to receive that honor. His grave is still visited today, stones placed gently on top, quiet thanks spoken or unspoken. But we're not done yet. Because the final part of this story isn't just about Schindler. It's about what his life tells us about courage, contradiction, and the strange ways ordinary people stumble into extraordinary roles. We come now to the quiet aftermath, the part of the story that rarely makes it into movies or school books because it doesn't fit neatly into a single emotion. It's not triumph, it's not tragedy either. It's something softer, heavier, and more honest. After the war, the world rushed forward. Europe rebuilt. New borders were drawn, new alliances formed. And Oskar Schindler, the man who had once moved through Nazi high society with a glass in his hand and a joke on his lips, found himself out of place almost everywhere. In Germany, he was viewed with suspicion. In Czechoslovakia, he had no home left. In business, he failed again and again. The same instincts that had helped him survive the war didn't translate well to peace. But among the people he saved, something very different happened. They didn't see him as a failed businessman or a flawed man. They saw him as the reason they were alive. They invited him into their homes. They helped him financially when they could. They spoke his name to their children and then to their grandchildren, not as a legend, but as a person. Oskar, the man who yelled at guards, the man who drank too much. The man who argued, bribed, lied, and somehow made space for life inside a system built for death. When survivors were asked later what made Schindler different, many struggled to answer. He wasn't gentle, he wasn't always kind, he could be selfish and loud and reckless. But when it mattered, when the choice was real and the cost was high, he chose people, again and again. And that's what makes his story so unsettling and so powerful. He proves that heroism doesn't require purity, it requires action. There's a danger in turning people like Schindler into perfect statues. When we do that, we quietly tell ourselves that we could never be like them, that they were special in some unreachable way. But Schindler wasn't special in the way we like to imagine. He didn't wake up one morning determined to save 1,000 lives. He stumbled into it, he reacted, he adjusted, he made terrible compromises and better choices. And step by step, he crossed a line from taking advantage of the system to fighting it from the inside. That's an uncomfortable lesson because it suggests that moments like this don't belong only to history. They belong to ordinary people in ordinary lives when pressure reveals who they really are. As the years passed, Schindler spoke occasionally but never easily. He didn't like praise, he brushed it off with jokes, and yet those closest to him knew the weight he carried. He remembered faces, names, moments when he almost failed. That regret he voiced at the end of the war never fully left him. It lived quietly beside the gratitude he received. And maybe that's the final truth of Oskar Schindler. He didn't see himself as a savior. He saw himself as a man who did what he could and knew it would never feel like enough. If this story has stayed with you, if it's made you pause and think about what courage really looks like, take a moment now to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes history is made only by perfect heroes. Stories like this remind us that the line between bystander and rescuer is thinner than we think. When Schindler died, he asked to be buried in Jerusalem near the people he had saved. His grave is simple, no grand words, just stones placed by visitors one by one, each stone saying what words don't need to: "Thank you, you mattered." And as I sit with this story, after all these years of telling war tales, I can't help but think about something larger than Schindler himself. World War II is often remembered through its machines and its battles, bombers over Europe, fleets at sea. And yes, the daring raids like the dambusters flying low over dark water, trusting skill, courage, and each other to change the course of a brutal war. Those men like Schindler didn't know how history would judge them. They only knew what was asked of them in that moment: to fly when fear said don't, to act when silence would have been safer, to believe that even a single night shortened, a single life saved was worth the risk. That's the thread that ties these stories together. Not glory, not perfection, but the enduring human spirit that shows up in the darkest hours and says quietly, "This is wrong and I won't look away." And maybe that's enough.